I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and I think we are incredibly lucky to have him. And I'm just going to put up his book. Mr. Unger, I read your book before. I checked it out again. I'm probably going to bring it on the plane when I'm reading tomorrow, so I can depress myself even more about the state of the country. Let me talk about our first speaker. Craig Unger is a New York Times bestselling author of 6 books on the Republican Party's relentless multi-pronged assault against American democracy, including House of Bush, House of Saud, House of Trump, House of Putin, and the current den of spies. A Harvard graduate, Unger's journalism has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, and many others. His media commentary spans all major outlets. His extensive reporting documents a powerful case the Republican Party has become the greatest threat to American democracy, all done in their heedless, corrupt power of pursuit and money. Only the 100th day in Trump's second presidential term, our democracy has been severely damaged, our courts have been compromised, and how did we get here? How can we restore American democracy? I think it's a question for Palos Verdes, it's a question for California, the United States, and it's a question for the rest of the world. So if we could please have a warm welcome for a fantastic author and defender of democracy, Mr. Craig Unger. Mr. Unger, thank you for joining us. And if you have a few opening comments before we have questions, we are thrilled that you could join us.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm delighted and honored to be here. I basically can talk about my newest book right here, which is Den of Spies, and or Trump, my 2 Trump books. But I'll try to. They're all related in a way, and I'll start out talking about Den of Spies, even though it started long ago. But it's especially relevant these days because we obviously we just bombed Iran, and the Iranian regime has been there for 45 years, and I think it's important to understand how it got there and why they're in power. And it's also part of, I think, what you'll see is, as you've noticed, I've done 6 books on the Republican assault on democracy, and this one I think does more than anyone to put it into perspective, to give you the broad view of what's happened really over the last 60 years, in which the Republican Party has become something that I've always hesitated to use the word fascism, but I think it's now about time to take it out of the closet. In any case, Den of Spies is different from my other books in a lot of ways, most importantly because it's personal. It's really 2 stories in one. Part of it is it's about a treasonous covert operation that seized the presidency, in which the Republican Party was not in power, and they hijacked American foreign policy to help win the election in 1980. And it's also important because that's how the Reagan-Bush era got started. This was the new era of conservatism, but it got underway thanks to a treasonous act. The real star of the show in this case is Bill Casey, who was campaign manager for Ronald Reagan at the time. He's also, to me, a dazzling figure in a lot of ways. I describe him as a mix of James Bond and Mr. Magoo. I was thinking of calling it Elmer Fudd. I mean, he was really sort of a comical character in a lot of ways. His code name was Mumbles when he was at the CIA. And the joke was, when he became head of the CIA, that all the top brass at the CIA needed scramblers, but not Bill Casey, because no one could understand what he was saying anyway. I mean, when Ronald Reagan was asked about his relationship with Casey, he said, I can never understand a word he said. And you can ask someone to repeat himself once, you can ask him twice, But after that, you start to sound rude. So I would just nod and smile at whatever he said. And you can just imagine that Casey, who was a brilliant, brilliant spy, was dreaming up some a really dark covert operation, and Reagan was smiling genially. In this case, one of the things about that I discovered about Casey is, even, it's one thing to run a presidential campaign. You can just imagine being in the spotlight like that, the media spotlight 24/7, as a presidential campaign is coming to a head. In Casey's case, he was doing that. And at the same time, he was running a dazzling covert operation that required him to meet with Israeli spies or South African arms dealers outside the country. And what I was able to do in this case, I think, to prove it, is that I just sort of uncovered his secret spy network. And I was able to talk to, on the record and taped interviews, with a man named Robert Sensi, who was an operative for Bill Casey. And he told me exactly how it worked. And he described traveling with Casey in Europe. Casey was wearing a disguise. He wore a blonde wig. He had a fake name and a fake passport. I believe it was Daniel. Forgive me, it's in the book, but he had a fake name, and they set up meetings with many of the mullahs of Iran, in which they made a secret deal. Remember, 52 hostages had been taken in November of 1979. As the campaign was underway, Jimmy Carter was under enormous pressure to win the release of the hostages. And as the election approached, it became increasingly clear if Carter could win them back, he would probably win the election. But if he didn't, he would be derided by the Republicans, as he was, as a weakling who allowed America to be humiliated. So the stakes were enormous. It was not just the lives of 52 Americans that were at stake. It was the next presidential election. And as it turned out, this was the start of the whole Reagan era, which ended up having 5 administrations, 2 with Ronald Reagan, 1 with George Bush Sr., and 2 with the younger George Bush, and Dick Cheney running things. So that's what grew out of this. Another thing that is forgotten from the American point of view, and I don't think I've ever seen it reported anywhere, and this came out of my interviews with the former president of Iran, Abul Hassan Banisadr. I interviewed him outside Paris, where he lived in exile. He had survived 3 assassination attempts and an impeachment, and finally fled the country to exile in Paris, where he died recently. But I interviewed him in 2016, and he was explaining that the Republicans were really, when the Iran Revolution took place, the Shah was overthrown both by the hardline fundamentalist religious clerics and secular Democrats, secular liberals, who were more like in the mold. Banisadr represented himself as being in the mold of the Prime Minister Mossadegh, who was a believer in secular Democrat. He was overthrown by the CIA in 1953. And I think the lesson out of all this is we created this problem for ourselves. And the CIA started in 1953, and they imposed a Shah who could be brutal, though he was very pro-West, but he was very brutal and repressive. And he was overthrown by the fundamentalists, and it was the Republicans who made that deal with them. And in so doing, they sort of pushed out of the frame the secular Democrats who were part of that revolution. And it became this hardline fundamentalist theocracy that exists to this day, and that's who we are bombing. So, you know, I mean, another thing, part of this whole thing that was fascinating to me is, it really took place in plain sight. It's one of these things that America is very much in denial about some of the darkest facts of our lives. And if I can't really see my audience, but if any of you are as old as I am and can remember Ronald Reagan being inaugurated in January 1981, as it was taking place, the hostages were supposed to be released the day before. And Jimmy Carter had dotted every I and crossed every T in the agreement to release the hostages. Iran has sworn they will release him during Carter's presidency. And suddenly it's January 20th. It's the morning, and the minutes are ticking away, and it's noon, and Reagan comes up to the podium, and he's giving his speech, and and the hostages are on the tarmac in the plane, ready to take off, but Iran won't release them until Reagan is sworn in, and you can see him taking the oath. And the chyrons on CNN are saying, finally, 52 American hostages are leaving Iran airspace. And so it was sort of evident in plain sight to anyone realized Reagan could not have negotiated with Iran. He had no power to negotiate with them until he was sworn in, and there he was on national television. We were all looking at him, and magically they're starting to arrive. The Onion, the satirical magazine, in their book looking back on the 20th century, noted this day, and they said their headline, they had a phony mocked up New York Times saying, Ronald Reagan inaugurated as president, urges America not to put two and two together. So it was very, there's something that should have been obvious that required an explanation. And this became a real issue in 1991 when George H.W. Bush Sr. was president, and he was about to run for re-election in 1992. So I thought this would be the major issue of the campaign, if it could be proven. Was George H.W. Bush a party to it? To what extent did he play a role in it? Did it really happen? One had to prove that it happened. And I started working on it for Esquire magazine. I did a big 10 or 12,000 word story for Esquire. It got a lot of attention. Newsweek immediately hired me and to continue the investigation. And if my audience is younger and isn't familiar with this era, this was a time when the so-called establishment press had a lot of clout. It's unlike today. I mean, we call them the legacy media, which suggests that they're dead, and they are near dead. And that's really one of the problems I think we face today. But at the time, Newsweek was owned by the Washington Post. It's not the same Newsweek that exists today. It's a different company. And there was still a bit of the halo of Watergate around the Washington Post company. So I figured this was going to be Watergate 2, and instead it turned out to be exactly the opposite. If you saw the movie or are familiar with All the President's Men, you will know how Katharine Graham, the owner, and Brent Bradley, the editor of the Washington Post, stood by Woodward and Bernstein as they uncovered everything. In this case, it was exactly the opposite. And everyone was sort of cozying up to Reagan. And for me, it was a personal and professional disaster. I was fired from Newsweek for pursuing this. I was sued by Bud McFarlane, Reagan's national security advisor, and basically there was a campaign to discredit me. Even though I really had enough evidence to know that it took place. There was a lot of evidence I had that was on background that I couldn't use at the time and was able to use years later for various reasons, because I was able to back it up with other parties, or in some cases, people, my sources died and finally had permission to speak, to quote them after their death. And among the other things that I got that I think prove the case was I got the receipts, quite literally. I got invoices of weapons that had been sold by Casey's operatives to Iran, and I got them from President Abul Hassan Bani Sadr. So it was very clear that this had been that Casey's operatives had the weapons and they arrived in Iran, and I had the invoices. I also had videotapes of some of the operatives who had died. And as I said, I had an interview with Robert Sensi, who was one of those operatives for Casey, who told me exactly how things went down. I also think, I mean, as I said, I think this is emblematic of what's been going on, and there's a long history here. And in Den of Spies, I tried to put it in historical perspective. And what I started to see is that if you go all the way back to the 60s, when Lyndon Johnson was president, and if you recall that he signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965, that changed the calculus of American politics, and it allowed blacks to vote in great numbers for the first time. And you know what? They were voting Democratic. And to compensate for that, the Republicans put together what they called the Southern Strategy. And it should be no secret to anyone, but if you look at the electoral maps, the red and blue electoral maps of each election from 1968 to the present, with only a couple of anomalies, those red states sure look a lot like the Confederacy. I mean, they are, with a few exceptions. It was a little different when the Democrats ran candidates who were from the South. Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton were able to pick up a few Southern states. But in a way, it gave me the idea that this is a Confederacy reborn. It's Confederate States of America 2.0. And let me go quickly through these elections, because in 1968, I mean, this is fairly well established, but I don't know how well known it is. But Richard Nixon did an operation very much like the October Spies of 1980. And he had an operative, a woman named Anna Chennault, who was a Chinese national. She married an American general, but she was also close to the president of South Vietnam. And as the 1968 presidential election was coming to a close, Lyndon Johnson was really trying to end the Vietnam War, and the Paris peace talks were going on, and it seemed like it would finally reach a resolution. But Nixon got Anna Chennault to go to the president of Vietnam, and she told him to boycott the Paris peace talks, and he did. And so there you have the last week of October. The presidential election is about to take place. The Democrats look like they are completely incompetent. They can't even get their ally to come to their peace talks. And again, Richard Nixon wins in a squeaker. Nixon knew that Lyndon Johnson had taped their conversations. Johnson had confronted him on the phone with it. And these phone calls, by the way, are available on the internet. And the University of Virginia has oral histories, and some of them are there, I believe. But he was so concerned that Johnson would effectively release these when he was running for re-election in 1972. He was petrified, so he put together a team of burglars. They were known as the plumbers, and he had them breaking in to find these documents, in search of these documents. And they broke into the Brookings Institute, and they broke into a hotel office complex in Washington called the Watergate. And that's how Watergate came about. So again, you had a second illegal operation in you have 1968, 1972. In 1980, you have the October Spies, which I've just told you about. In 2000, you have the Brooks Brothers riots. Roger Stone was led these guys dressed in suits and ties to interfere with the vote counting. The recount was going on in Florida, and they made it impossible to have a recount, and that sent it ultimately to the Supreme Court of the United States, which of course ended up deciding Bush v. Gore in favor of the Republicans. And then you have the Obama era is fine, but in 2016, you have Trump Russia again. And I'll get to that in these books in one second. In 2020, Biden won, but the Republicans weren't very happy with that. And they had the January 6th riots, insurrection that tried to overthrow that. And again, in 2024, I'm not sure what we'll uncover. I mean, I've only been able to do 6 books. I'm sorry if I can't do more. But Elon Musk's takeover, to me, of Twitter was sort of astonishing, because Twitter at that time, and I had a fairly decent following, about 50,000 people. And if you went, and I think they had 600 million people on Twitter, and once Musk took over, you could see the national conversation change dramatically. And he could get his guys to tweak his algorithm so that if people were tweeting critically about Donald Trump, they would be shadow banned, as I've been shadow banned. And I notice every time, I used to be able to do tweets that would get 800,000 or 1 million views. Now I tend to get 673 views every time. So I think something is going on there. And that leads me to these books, and I'll try to go through them quickly and take questions. But essentially, House of Trump, House of Putin is about, both of them really are about how Donald Trump became a Russian asset. And I'm trying to do this on my Substack as well, step by step by step. And it's not one of those, one of my favorite movies as a kid, still one of my favorite movies, was the original Manchurian Candidate, not the one with Meryl Streep and Denzel Washington, but the early one with Frank Sinatra and Angela Lansbury. And it's this horrifying, paranoid, conspiratorial world that you see for the first time. This is not exactly like that. They didn't, the KGB didn't pinpoint Donald Trump 45 years ago, really, and say, we're going to make him president of the United States. That's not what happened. But they had hundreds of spies, and in the 80s, they were looking for assets and agents. It started with in 1980, well, in 1977, Trump married Ivana. She was a Czech national. She lived in a city called Zilm, Czechoslovakia. And that happened to be the headquarters for the STB, the Czech secret police, which shared stuff with the East Bloc allies in the KGB. So they were keeping an eye on him even then. In 1980, there's a man named Semyon Kislin. He's still around, and he was I'm going to mix these two books together to show you the order in which things happen. But according to my source, Yuri Shvets, who was a major in the KGB, Semyon Kislin was a spotter agent for the KGB. And that meant he was out there looking for assets and agents to recruit. An asset, it's important to understand the distinction between an asset and an agent. An agent is on the payroll. He or she knows he's employed by working for an intelligence agency. And he or she can be tasked with specific operations. An asset is a much looser category, and you share favors. You know, it's a trusted, confidential source who gives you information and can be given information. And that's how it started with Trump. He was developing, this was one of his first and one of his very, very few great successes. He developed what is now the Hyatt Grand Central Hotel. And like every hotel, it needed television sets. And you would expect a Hyatt or a brand name franchise like that to get their hotel, get their television sets from, I don't know, Sony or Samsung or a major vendor like that. Instead, Donald Trump went to a place called Joy Ludd Electronics, which was owned by Semyon Kislin, and it was a KGB front. And that's how they reached out to Trump and started things off. He later met with Natalia Dubinina and her father. Her father was the ambassador first to the UN and later to the United States. He did not speak English, so I'm not sure what kind of conversations he had with Trump, though he apparently met with Trump. And Natalia has sold her story as though her father speaks English. I believe that's not the case. And according to Yuri Shvets, she was working for the KGB, and that's how it started off. And the KGB sent Trump to Moscow in 1987. That was orchestrated by General Gerasimov, including according to Yuri Shvets. And things sort of took off from there. When he was there, there, of course, have been a lot of reports that have not been corroborated about compromise and cameras in his hotels and all that sort of. A lot of that stuff has just not been corroborated. But what was interesting and is corroborated, and I was able to get documents on this as well, is Trump immediately came back from there and started to run for president. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. At the time, he was known only as a playboy, really. He'd never done anything serious. But he actually made, this was the election that George H.W. Bush won in 1988. But Trump, before the primaries, made a campaign appearance in New Hampshire, which was sort of a rite of passage if you were going to run in the primaries. And he took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, and I quote it in my book. I mean, it was not just the Times. He took it in the Boston Globe and the Washington Post as well. And it's quite astonishing in that it really puts forth everything he's saying today. He said NATO is crap. Our allies why are we supporting them as allies? We shouldn't support Japan. We shouldn't be supporting NATO. We're wasting our money. And it was just an extraordinary position to take at the time. Remember, this was leading up to the end of the Soviet Union. And NATO had been a very powerful, and I think a productive force. The entire Western Alliance ended up building strong democratic institutions in more than 24 countries in Europe. They built up strong market economies. We became very powerful a powerful trade partnership that benefited both sides. And Donald Trump is suddenly out of the blue saying he wants to destroy this. And those were exactly the KGB talking points back then. I mean, I had many dozens of hours interviewing Yuri Shvets. He was, as I said, he was an operative in Washington Station. His cover was that he was a journalist working for TASS. In fact, he was recruiting his own spies for the Soviet Union, and his friends and colleagues in New York Station were recruiting Donald Trump as an asset. What kind of asset? At the time, one big asset they had was a man named Armand Hammer, he had been CEO of Occidental Petroleum, and he had been a very important asset for Russian intelligence. He was, as I said, was CEO of a powerful oil company and was getting very lucrative franchises through oil deals. He went back to the days of Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin. By the 80s, he was aging out, and I think the Soviets were hoping someone like Donald Trump would be a replacement for him. But in any case, they slowly groomed him over the years. Another way they groomed him was in 1984, and forgive me for going out of sequence, but in 1984, a man named David Bogadin walked into Trump Tower and put down $6 million in cash. By the way, I've done that just for inflation. That's close to 30 million today, or in that neighborhood. And he said, I'll take 5 condos in Trump Tower. Trump Tower had just reopened, and he bought them. When you start to look at who lived in Trump Tower, I ended up finding 13 members of the Russian mafia, according to FBI files, who were associated with the mafia. It's also important to understand what the Russian mafia is. The Russian mafia is very, very, very different from the Italian mafia, or the mafia we're familiar with in films like The Godfather, where you always had the FBI fighting the mafia, or in real life, you actually had Rudy Giuliani fighting the Italian mafia. But with the Russian mafia, they were considered an arm of Russian intelligence. They worked with the KGB, and they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, so long as it served the interests of the KGB. And it's important to understand, again, when you look at Vladimir Putin and you hear the term mafia state, it's not just a metaphor, it's real. I mean, and in the same way, mafia bosses would say, okay, you can handle the prostitution, he'll control heroin, so-and-so will get gambling. Putin was doing that with the entire economy. So someone like Deripaska would get the aluminum industry. And there would be wars over these industries, as there were mafia wars in the United States. But the oligarchs are essentially mob bosses. And let's see.
Mr. Unger, a quick question. We have a lot of people here. Would you mind answering some questions?
Sure. Why don't we go to questions now? I mean, I think those are the basic points I want to get across.
And one thing I want to say, you had asked about, the makeup of this audience. We have like 1,000 people here.
Wow.
They're extremely good looking, very intelligent, and they have some great questions for you. But first of all, how about a hand for this fantastic speaker? Volume's on low, but it's 1,000 people, so it's pretty loud for you.
I didn't realize that that meant wonderful. I mean, I'm not.
Exactly. All right. And
People have to come up here if they want to ask.
if you want to ask a question you're welcome to come up here, but and ask very quickly. Or if not, you can ask a question and I'll repeat it to Mr. Unger. So yeah, you're welcome to come up. Come on up. Sure.
Sure. Hi, Craig. It's Louis Vandenberg. Thank you so much for coming out here. I'm really honored to have you. We're, I think, all honored to have you here. Your work is so dense with information. It's like a fire hose of information you put out here today. I just wanted to mention that when you spoke about the Southern strategy, I have met and interviewed Kevin Phillips, and we became friends. And he is the author of the Southern strategy, as you probably know. He greatly regret his involvement in that whole process, and you can see that in his writing and many books that he published. You mentioned the mafia connection, and I see Donald Trump as somebody who's not inspired by Jefferson or Washington. He's inspired by Carlo Gambino. And when he saw the structure of Russia, he instantly recognized that that was a mafia structure, which he sought to put in place in his presidency. So the question here is, you also mentioned that you didn't want to use the word fascist, but it was needed to be used. Isn't that a compliment, though, to Trump? It's like it implies that he has an ideology. He is just a criminal, isn't that?
Right. Yeah. I don't think he is. His ideology is me. It's all about what's good for him. There's no set of ideas. But you're right. Yes, I mean that's the one reason to hesitate to use the word fascism. But it's certainly a violation of all the democratic principles we know, I think.
Okay, great. Raise your hand if you have another question. You're next, sir. Bakani, come on up. You have a question? Go ahead.
Hello. I had a much simpler theory about Trump and Putin. Of course, I'm not an investigative reporter, and I haven't looked into it, and I have no receipts like you do. But since about 2015, I thought Trump took a look at Putin, who at the time was purported to be the richest man in the world, and saw how he became the richest man in the world by sucking all the resources out of the Russian economy and setting up the oligarchy and all of that. And I thought Trump thought, well, I can be the richest man in the world because the U.S. economy is so much bigger, and I will set up a similar oligarchy and be clearly the richest man in the world. And he didn't manage to do it in his first term, but I think he's doing a pretty good job this time. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I do. And I also want to say, I mean, when you look at the Russian oligarchs, I think Trump is thinking of Elon Musk and a lot of the Silicon Valley tech bros or the oligarchs as the equivalent, really. I mean, the Peter Thiels and all those people. So, and to me, that's one of the scariest things of all going on now, when you understand how much data Elon Musk must have siphoned off by now and what he can do with that data. I think it's very, very scary.
Okay, we have another person in the room.
You're next.
Thank you.
Just introduce yourself and then just ask your question.
My name is Chris Correa, and I was just curious, what do you think of the Christopher Steele report?
Yeah. Well, one is, I think it was raw data. I mean, I've stayed away from him because the whole thing was so toxic, and I've done that intentionally. Friends have said, why don't you talk to him, or wanted to introduce me, and I've kept a distance just because when something is labeled toxic, I want to. I've been through that myself, but I sort of feel sorry for him because this was raw data. If you went through all my notes, I interview a lot of crazy people, right? And some I can't corroborate. If you went through a lot of my notes, you'd find all that. And I think that's what happened to him, and that's what his file was about. I've heard firsthand from people who've told me they saw tapes, not P tapes, but and I haven't used it because I can't corroborate it. And there's no question that Trump went there. I know to Russia, and I'm sure he probably had a good time at various points, or he wouldn't have gone back so much. And the Russians use hidden cameras all the time. So it certainly wouldn't surprise me, but I don't want to say anything until I corroborate it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Unger. Our next question is from someone who's watching via Zoom, Mr. Tony Hale. Tony, you have asked the question, introduce yourself, and talk to Mr. Unger.
Thank you. Tony Hale, Executive Board Member of the California Democratic Party. I was a student of Iran-Contra when it was going on, and afterwards. I think it's pretty clear that because of writings like yours and the writings of others, we have pretty clear evidence that the Reagan campaign committed high treason in negotiating against the standing presidents, the sale of weapons to our enemies. They took the money from the sale of those weapons and turned it into a private foreign policy to fund terrorism in Central America. And America turned away. And we really did not learn from that experience. How can we justify the value of journalism when all this work leads to America turning away?
Well, I mean, I'm scared just for, by the way, just for the state of journalism is so pathetic. I cannot, it scares the shit out of me, to be honest. That is, when I started out, and what got me into journalism was the Pentagon Papers, the My Lai Massacre, Watergate. We remember that for more than 50 years later. When it came out, it landed with a giant, everyone was shocked. Now nothing lands at all. And, you know, when I come across something that I think can be a big, you know, as I try to continue in this vein, I'm at a loss, you know, and it's true. I'm probably not addressing your question because, you know, I think the Democrats have to, there are no guardrails anymore. Either I mean, Trump fires 17 inspectors general. That says it. I mean, what more do you need to know? There are no ways of, those are the people who are supposed to inspect everything wrong. And I think this has been a problem with America has lied to itself again and again and again. And the most beautiful things we've ever said. I mean, I think like Thomas Jefferson's, all men are created equal. Well, when he wrote that, he didn't include women, didn't include African Americans. He didn't include 6 of his children by Sally Hemings. So it was a lie, and that's happened again and again and again. And I tried to show that through all the elections, but it requires both real journalism, and our journalistic institutions are fading, and real accountability and oversight in the government. And we had those institutions. And I think what my 6 books show, you see the gradual erosion of all of them, one after another after another. I mean, the Watergate hearings, you know, they were exciting. That was binge watching. That was the first binge watching experience I ever had. I couldn't wait to watch the hearings. Watergate less so, and they didn't really get to the bottom of it. Iran-Contra, I'm sorry, less so, and they didn't get to the bottom of it because the bottom of Iran-Contra was the October surprise. It didn't start in 1984, as the Iran-Contra hearing seemed to show. It started 4 years earlier, trading weapons illegally to Iran with the October surprise. So you need both. And I'm trying to figure out my next story. Where do I publish? Can you publish, that is, if you ask about the tapes and Christopher Steele, suppose you find, one were to find something like that. Can you publish it in America today? I don't know. It's very, very scary to me.
And Craig, we have another question for you from online. We have thousands of people online as well, and they're all extremely good looking and intelligent. Zoe, I think you had a question. Please announce yourself and ask for Mr. Unger.
Hi, Mr. Unger. Thank you so much do you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm a citizen journalist myself, and I think global and act local. I live in Santa Monica, and I'm running for California State Senate District 24. My question is, because I'm focusing, again, what you're speaking, but speaking about the oligarchs in California, because the tech industry influence here. And there's a group of tech people, pillars, billionaires that are buying land on a farm, and they want to create, and this has been on the news, they want to create their private city. And the farmers that do not sell, they sue them. So if you go to Perfect Union, that is a great Instagram account for media that builds power for working people. It is published there. And those of you who do not know the platform, you get a lot of information, and they do a lot of investigative journalism like you do. So perhaps you can write for them or produce for them, since you were talking where we can write. So yes, it's called More Perfect Union, and they have won multiple awards. But again, going back to California, because this is the club is in California, and we are seeing issues here with already this oligarchy that is purchasing land. How we can create people power to really protect our land and not create this enormous differences in wealth that will affect all of us sooner or later.
Right. Well, I'm not sure exactly how to address it. I'm thinking more in terms of my sector. What's scary is I see the demise of all the old journalistic institutions. I mean, you saw what happened to Jeff Bezos in the Washington Post, where they did a complete U-turn. And I mean, that's enormously depressing. But the larger question to me is, if you look at the First Amendment, it talks about freedom of the press. And it doesn't go on to broadcasting, and it certainly doesn't go on to TV, and it certainly doesn't go on to the internet or social media. And we need that protection for these new platforms, and we don't have it. There is no federal regulation of those. And when you watch, as I said, I already said, I watched the conversation change in what is now called X when Elon Musk took it over, and it was really sort of horrifying. And we need something where the national conversation, a legitimate national conversation, can be protected in a way that it is not today.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Unger. We have a question now for our Vice President, Tim Dixon.
Mr. Unger, again, thank you for joining us today. Your history lesson at the start, although horrifying, I think reminds us, as Mark Twain said, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And the Republican Party being an entity that's been trying to steal elections or steal democracy is not something new. It's existed for most of our lifetime. My question, as you know, we've listened to you today, is with the legacy media not even performing their full task and some of the historical examples you gave, and certainly not being there today, and being replaced with falsehoods and these things that entities that claim to be the media, What can we as a club, what can we as American citizens do, in your opinion, to protect our democracy?
Well, I'm I don't have all the answers. I mean, right now, I mean, I think Substack has some promise, and I've been trying to build out my platform there. If I can do a little self-promotion, please log on to my Substack. It's just my name, Craig Unger. And I'm doing a Trump-Russia timeline where I really say this is how it, I think people have to understand the past. So I'm saying Trump is a Russian asset. This is how it happened step by step. And I've done 21 posts to that. But but even there, I look at who, I want to see, well, who owns Substack? And one of the owners is Mark Andreessen, who is sort of pals with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. So I'm scared that they'll pull the rug out from under that. And I don't know tech bros who are we need support in that sector, and we don't have it. And it's sort of shocking to me. I mean, I certainly 10 years ago, I didn't think of Silicon Valley as a right-wing place, but that's what it's becoming, I guess. And it's enormously important. And I mean, for you in California, I don't know what control you have over that, but if there are progressive tech bros, we need them, especially because I've been trying to move from one platform to another, and it's more exhausting than doing investigative reporting.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name's John Taylor. I see the corruption in our government right now. I see the voter suppression, the purging of voter rolls. And a little while back, I still believed that we had a democracy. But when the Supreme Court said one person is in fact above the law, I felt that's it. I'll still fight. I'll still march. I'll still make phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. But I really believe that we are no longer in a democracy. We're in sort of a competitive, authoritarian type of system. What do you think? Is this still a democracy at this point right now? Could we actually have a free and fair election?
I'm trying to look forward to the midterms, which are too far away. And right now, I mean, one would think if there were a free and fair election, the Democrats would take the House, right? Maybe the Senate too. And I'm sure the Republicans know that, and they're doing everything they can to stop it. And one thing that I haven't figured out is, how do you stand by, if we stand by our principles, how do you stand by your principle when the other side is cheating? How do you do that? I don't have the answer to that. But I think it's a huge problem. And I think I'd be surprised. I mean, I'm trying to game things out. There could well be martial law before the next election, but who knows what they will try, but they will try something. I think that's for sure.
I'm Carol Moeller. My question is, you mentioned the legacy media and how dodgy a lot of it is. So what media sources do you trust?
Well, that's a very good question. I trust The Guardian, which of course is not American. I trust ProPublica. There are a lot of writers I like on Substack who I trust. The New York Times has been very disappointing, I think, often. And there are good journalists here and there, but there are good journalists in the Times, and there's still some good ones in the Washington Post. It's not all black and white. I don't mean to whitewash everything, but it's very hard. You have to pick and choose. And I've read the New York Times every day, I think, for nearly 70 years. And now I don't read it. Now I spend less, and now I think, oh, that's the one with the crossword puzzles, isn't it? Or they have Wordle, they have their games. That's what brings them their money. I mean, the economics of journalism is such that the era I grew up in, all publications really relied on advertising. And the internet wiped that out. Craigslist alone took away classified ads, which is 15% of revenues for all newspapers. Bam, gone like that. So it's been very hard for newspapers to keep up. And it seems to me that social media platforms can be very profitable, but they've all turned, I don't trust them at all. Facebook or Musk. And that makes it very hard. On Substack now, you can pick and choose, and there are dozens of people I like, and you can pick and choose them one at a time. Other than that, the foreign press is, I realized on TV, I'm starting to watch Al Jazeera or German television as an English language broadcast. But it's not good.
Mr. Unger, my name is Warren Cam. I was very disappointed that the Mueller report seemed to avoid talking about Trump's financial connections with the Russians. Why was that? And why didn't it delve into an obvious connection with Russia?
Well, there's another book there. I mean, this is the greatest counterintelligence failure in history. Imagine, President of the United States is a Russian asset. How that happened without the FBI or CIA doing anything? The Mueller report, there were conversations. I believe it was Roy Rosenstein and Mueller, he was the deputy attorney general at the time. And they decided the Mueller report would only be a criminal investigation. It needed to be a counterintelligence investigation. I mean, just look at Trump Tower. This guy, Donald Trump, is laundering money for the Russian mafia, and the Russian mafia is part of the KGB. It's an arm of the KGB. You can find all of that in FBI files. That's where I got the data. So the FBI knew that, and they didn't do anything with it. Why not? William Sessions was head of the FBI. When he resigned, who did he represent? One of his first clients was Simeon Mogilevich, who's one of the multi-billionaire Russian mobster who plays a huge role in this stuff. This is all in House of Trump, House of Putin. I go through it, and he's still a figure there, and they just let it happen. One of the people who succeeded William Sessions was Louis Freeh, director of the FBI. He ended up representing Prevazon. If you followed Bill Browder and the Magnitsky Act, Prevazons were the guys who stole. They were the bad guys from Russia. So he ends up with a $10 million home in Palm Beach, right next to Mar-a-Lago. So the FBI, I haven't gone through everything in the FBI, but I think they dropped the ball a lot of ways, and those may be some of the reasons. There was another man named James Kallstrom, who was head of the New York office of the FBI. He was very good friends with Donald Trump. Also, you had Charles McGonigal, another guy, FBI guy who ends up working for the Russians. So I think that was a lot of the problem. It's not the entire story, but it's a big part of it.
Mr. Unger, Merrick Garland probably could have ended this 2 or 3 years ago. Was he either compromised or just incredibly incompetent?
The honest answer is I do not know. And but it does seem, it's shocking that Trump wasn't, I mean, he was convicted of 34 felonies, but he wasn't sentenced. and that's just extraordinary. And I looking back, when you look at Biden had the presidency for 4 years, and that should have been enough time to clean this up. But they didn't do it. And I mean, the Democrats have dropped the ball a lot. And it was shocking to me going back through the investigation of the October surprise. The Democrats controlled Congress at the time. They had a 100-seat majority in Congress, and they still dropped the ball. And Lee Hamilton was leading the investigation. And for I kept thinking, God, he had to be corrupt to be so incompetent. In the end, I found nothing corrupt about him, except that he was a kind of go along to get along guy. Okay, whatever, you know, if you think so-and-so shouldn't be on the committee, that's fine. Well, so-and-so should have been on the committee because he was a dogged investigator, and the Republicans pushed him off. And that happens so much with the Democrats. It drives me crazy. They need to be fighters, you know.
Quick question. My name is Daria. I keep wondering and saying also midterms. The only way we can change anything is with the midterms. But, you know, we've tried to impeach this one person 3 times. There's quite a few people we could impeach if we had 67 senators. And I think we should make it our objective, to whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to get a grassroots efforts to get across to people who are being represented by these senators that they have to push the senators, whether their reelection is this term or 2 years later, that they will not be reelected until they do the right thing. And again, we shouldn't make it a Democrat versus Republican. We need to make it democracy versus oligarchy, as you're saying. And we just aren't reaching out with the fact base in the places where people are. So the newspaper is great, but whatever the readership of the New York Times is, it's not sufficient. We need to get on the internet. We need to reach young people, and we need to make it clear that it's now or never. You've got to stick up for yourself, because you're going to lose your health care and your jobs and your security and your safety net. And this generation has no plans for retiring, I guess, because they're all losing those very important things. I do taxes, and if this bill passes, which I'm sure it will, this is another $3.5 trillion to $5.5 trillion debt laid onto that generation. Wherever we have to go, we have to reach them. That's my opinion. But whatever you have to say to help that happen, please speak to it.
Right. I wish I could add more to it. I mean, again, I'm a reporter and I do what I can, but I'm finding it increasingly difficult to do it. What scares me a lot about this country is I think there are vast areas where people are very, very, very poorly informed.
Yeah. Mr. Unger, do you have time for a question from a high school student?
Sure.
Absolutely. Dylan, come on up. Dylan Suarez has a question for you.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I just wanted to ask, because you mentioned the Senate, what you think the Democratic Party's platform should be in retaking that for the midterms and or the House for the future, considering that how important it will be to oppose Trump into the second part of his term.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer this question. I mean, clearly the party is divided in a lot of ways in terms of the best way to position itself. But at some point, you would think the red states would start to feel the pain, and they haven't. And you look at the election that just took place in New York, and Mondani won basically, I think, on a economic platform of making things affordable. And I think we have to address that nationally, but we also should get some of the. You can't forget that democracy is at stake, and I don't spend enough time in the red states, to be honest. I don't know anyone who's a MAGA. I don't know. I mean, I don't know anyone who's had a successful conversation in converting one. And whatever works is what I would say, because winning is everything. We can't lose the election. We can't stand. We have to go after whatever message is going to win. And I don't have that right now. Things may change as the election approaches, but I'm sure the economy is a very, very big part of it. And we can't drop the ball on that.
Mr. Unger, we have a question for you for someone from Zoom. Sounds like a great name, like a news anchor. Cord Cassidy, the news. But Cord Cassidy with the question. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Mr. Unger, thank you for being with us today. So I'm trying to use my voice and my work as a writer to be part of the resistance. And one of the things I'm writing about is the failure of imagination. So what I mean by that is we're on the doorstep of an authoritarian regime because we never imagined that we would be. We never imagined a president of the United States would go against all of our partners and allies. We never imagined a president of the United States would be as blatantly just dishonest and going for the grift the way this president is. The good news about imagination is that the framers of the Constitution imagined a system in which there was something called impeachment. And it feels like whenever I say this to any of my friends, they say, oh, that'll never happen. I wanted to get your thoughts on whether it could happen. The math, an earlier speaker mentioned the math, 20 Republican senators after articles go from the House to the Senate, which is could be very likely, then we could imagine that 20 Republican senators is all it will take to save America. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's great. I mean, wonderful. I would love that to happen. But I'm wondering. My guess is though that we need something more of a mass movement, the No King's Day, I think was pretty successful and a good start. But it may take something like a general strike or something. I think things will come to a head with these midterms. At some point, I think there's going to be violence. I think, that the Republicans are not going to give up power. They're very good at keeping it. And that's going to be a battle. And I'd love to get those 20 Republican senators. But it's sort of extraordinary if you've been watching carefully over the it's nearly 10 years since Trump became a major political player. But you see the one person after another, like Lindsey Graham, who used to hate him, or J.D. Vance, who used to hate him, and they just, bam. And it's not like they don't know. They know, but they're scared to go against him, and then they get rewarded for backing him. And he's been very successful in manipulating things that way.
One thing I would just add is that if we imagine there aren't going to be midterms, that may be what we need to be imagining. That Trump will overpower what we tend to do is we talk about the midterms being the savior, the be all, the end all. That's how we'll get it back. But what if we imagine there won't be midterms because there will instead be martial law? There will instead be federal interference in state elections.
Well, I would not be surprised if something happens where I don't know what they would do. I don't want to imagine what they're going to do. But I can certainly see potential violence happening as the midterms approach. And I think somehow or other we need a mass movement, non-violent, and even with that, there will likely be blood. And I don't know if that can change things or not. But we're the midterms are going to be very, it'll be very interesting as they approach.
Greg, you have been a fantastic speaker. So I want to, how about a big hand for.
Well, thank you.
And Craig, out of all the Democratic groups in California, this one is the best.
Well, I'm impressed with the size of the crowd. That's wonderful.
Yes, and how good looking we are, right? Yes.
You're very good looking, and I think there's people there who don't have gray hair for a change.
Yes. Craig, just a quick question. If you are, if you're in the neighborhood of July 20th, just let us know. Great speakers, free sandwiches for you, and we'll have some ice cream as well.
Wonderful.
All right. Good. Thanks again for joining us, Craig. You're very generous with your time.
Well, I enjoyed it, and thank you for having me. And don't forget my Substack, okay?
Absolutely. Sign for Craig Unger Substack. His books are extremely readable. I think I'm going to read House of Putin, House of Trump again, because it was so good. And so thank you again for that, Craig.